Welcome to Reform Thinking. We are really thrilled to have you joining us today for a custom-tailored deep dive.
It is great to be here.
We have a very specific mission for this conversation. We are taking a massive stack of linguistic sources specifically, these comprehensive Hebrew lexicon entries we have been reviewing, and we are extracting the most fascinating insights about a single, seemingly simple biblical word.
Just one word for the whole deep dive.
Right, just one. That word is the Hebrew verb halak, which translates basically to go or walk. Now, you might be wondering why we are dedicating an entire analysis to just one verb. Why does a whole deep dive on one action word matter so much?
It is a fair question to ask.
We are doing this because this single word dictates the biblical framework for living, dying, sin, and our covenantal standing before God. When you read your Bible, you see the word walk all the time, but in the original Hebrew, halak carries massive theological weight. It shapes how we understand our relationship with the Lord.
It really does. To start us off, I will provide a calm, synthesizing overview of the material we are working from today. Halak is a very common Semitic root. You find it in ancient related languages all across the ancient Near East.
So it wasn't just isolated to the Israelites?
No, not at all. In Akkadian, which is the language of the ancient Assyrians and Babylonians, you have the word alakhu, which means to go or to live. In Ugaritic, a language closely related to Biblical Hebrew, the root is also HLK. The root is incredibly old and widely used, but its usage in the Hebrew scriptures offers massive theological weight.
It is definitely not just a word for physical locomotion.
Right. The lexicons provide us with exhaustive lists of how this word appears in different grammatical forms, taking us from literal walking to intensive living, and even to God causing events to happen. By tracing this single root through the Old Testament, we get a clear window into the ancient Israelite mind.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the anatomy of a step, the literal and sometimes bizarre uses of halak, because when we think of walking, we think of human feet hitting the pavement.
That is the modern assumption, yeah.
But halak applies to much more than human feet. This verb is used to describe the movement of things that do not even have legs.
Which is where the lexicons get really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. For instance, in Genesis 3.14, God curses the serpent after the fall. The text says the snake will go or crawl on its belly. The word used there is halak.
The snake is walking on its belly.
Right. Then, in Genesis 7.18, during the massive flood in Noah's day, the text describes the waters prevailing and the ark floating on the surface of the water. The literal Hebrew says the ark walked upon the face of the waters.
It's such a vivid picture.
And it gets even stranger. In Exodus 9.23, during the plague of hail, the text says fire darted down to the earth. Again, that is halak. The fire is walking or running down from the sky.
Fire walking down to the earth.
Yes. And in Joshua 16.8, when the text describes the geographical borders of the Promised Land, it says the boundary went or ran to the sea. The boundary is a conceptual line, but the Hebrew uses halak to describe its extension.
So it covers quite a bit of ground.
Think of halak as a blank canvas verb in English, sort of like the words get or run, that completely absorbs the flavor of whatever noun is performing the action. The noun tells the verb how to behave.
What's fascinating here is the sheer linguistic flexibility of the term, alongside the linguistic quirks we find when looking at sibling languages.
What do you mean by sibling languages?
Well, while Hebrew uses this root to describe the fluid motion of an arc or a boundary line, other Semitic languages took the root in entirely different directions. In Arabic, the root halakha does not mean to walk or to go. It means to perish or to be destroyed.
Wow, so the Arabic root for walking means to be destroyed.
Yes. So within the broader language family, there is a built-in association between moving forward and coming to an end. We will see that specific concept emerge in Hebrew later on. But regarding your point about the fluidity of the word, halak is frequently used for liquids.
Right, the lexicons mention that.
In 1 Kings 18.35, during Elijah's showdown with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, Elijah has the altar drenched with water. The text says the water ran or flowed around the altar. The verb is halak. The water walked around the altar.
That is a great visual.
The prophet Joel uses striking imagery in Joel 4.18. He's looking forward to a day of restoration, and he prophesies that the hills will flow with milk. The hills are walking with milk.
Walking with milk. It sounds so poetic when you read it literally.
It does. But there is also a graphic euphemism in Ezekiel 7.17, which describes people in absolute terror facing judgment.
Oh, I remember seeing this in the source material.
The English translations usually say something like, all knees will be weak as water. but the literal Hebrew says all knees will walk with water. The implication is a loss of bodily control out of sheer terror.
That is terrifying.
The verb halak adapts constantly, capturing the motion of solid objects, borders, fire, and fluids.
That imagery of the knees walking with water paints a vivid, terrifying picture of judgment. You really have to laugh at how visual the Hebrew language is, animating inanimate objects like that.
It is incredibly animated.
But the visual energy of halak is not limited to vocabulary. It extends into the grammar itself. This brings us to the grammar of progress and how Hebrew shows growth or escalation.
This is one of my favorite parts of the lexicon entries.
There is a grammatical construct that creates a real aha moment for anyone reading the text. It involves the infinitive absolute. To explain it simply, Hebrew sometimes takes a basic unconjugated form of a verb, in this case, halakh, which means going, and places it right next to another verb.
Right.
When Hebrew places going next to another action, it indicates a continuous, escalating, or intensifying action. It means something is happening more and more. The action is compounding on itself. I was looking at the notes on Jonah 1, and the grammar there is fascinating. How does Hebrew capture that escalating storm using this construct?
The narrative effect in Jonah 1 is quite striking. Jonah is on the ship, fleeing from the Lord, and a massive storm hits. The sailors ask Jonah what they should do to him to make the sea calm down.
Right, because they're panicking.
Exactly. And the Hebrew text does not just say the sea was stormy. It uses this grammatical construct, stating that the sea was going and storming. The sea grew more and more tempestuous. The danger escalated with every passing second.
So it wasn't just a static bad storm, it was actively getting worse.
Yes. We see another famous example in the historical books. In 1 Samuel 3.1, there is a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David.
After Saul dies, right?
Yes. The text uses this halak construct to describe the shifting political dynamic. It says David kept growing stronger and stronger while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker.
The literal translation is fascinating there.
Literally, David was going and getting strong, and Saul's house was going and getting weak. The motion of the verb halak drives the historical narrative. And we see it in the wisdom literature as well. Proverbs 4.18 says that the path of the just is like a shining light, growing brighter and brighter until the full day. Literally, the light is going and shining.
If we look at this continuous escalating action through a reformed lens, it beautifully mirrors the doctrine of sanctification.
I completely agree.
In the Westminster Confession, sanctification is a progressive work. It is distinct from justification, which is an instantaneous, one-time legal declaration of righteousness. Sanctification requires ongoing movement.
It is a lifelong process.
The grammar of halak perfectly illustrates this. Righteousness in the life of a believer is an ongoing, increasing motion, a light growing brighter and brighter. You are going and becoming holy by God's grace.
Spot on.
Conversely, as we see with the stormy sea in Jonah, sin and judgment also have a progressive, escalating nature, hardening the heart more and more. The grammar itself preaches a sermon.
It illustrates the theology perfectly. The Hebrew language does not allow for a static view of the believer's life. You are always in motion. But as much as halak is about progressing and moving forward, it is also the primary word used to describe the end of that movement.
That is a fascinating pivot. Let's shift our focus to discuss how halak is used to describe fading, departing, and dying.
The lexicon has a whole section dedicated to this.
It is almost poetic how the ancient Hebrews viewed mortality. Death was not seen as a hard stop. It was a departure, a walking away. We see several poignant euphemisms for mortality found in the text that use this verb. If life is a continuous walk, it makes sense that death is framed as the final steps of that specific path.
Yes, and this ties back to that Arabic cognate we mentioned earlier, where the root means to perish. In Hebrew, the concept of dying is conceptualized as taking a final trip.
What are some examples of that?
A classic example is Joshua 23.16. Joshua is at the end of his life, giving his farewell address to the leaders of Israel. He says, "I am going the way of all the earth." The verb there is halak. Death is the universal road that every human being must walk.
He is walking out of this life.
Exactly. We see a similar usage in Genesis 15.2. God comes to Abraham in a vision promising a great reward. But Abraham laments his lack of an heir. He says, "Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless?"
Some modern translations just say die childless, don't they?
They do, but the Hebrew is going childless. He is walking toward the end of his life without an heir. Furthermore, the word describes fleeting things in nature to illustrate this transience.
Like a changing of the seasons.
Yes, In Hosea 6.4, the Lord indicts Ephraim and Judah for their fickle faithfulness. He says their goodness is like the morning cloud and like the early dew that passes away or goes away.
That is halak again.
Right. In Job 7.9, Job describes the finality of death by saying, "As the cloud vanishes and goes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. The cloud walks away." And in the Song of Solomon 2.101, the joyful arrival of spring is described by saying, "The winter is past, and the rain is over and gone."
Let me guess the rain has walked away.
Literally, yes. The rain has walked away.
I want you to consider how that shapes the biblical view of life. We are so used to thinking of life as a possession we hold on to. Modern culture does everything it can to hide death, to pretend it isn't coming.
We definitely insulate ourselves from it.
But the biblical language treats life as a transient motion. We are passing through. Our lives, our trials, even the seasons of nature are just walking past us. It is a vapor that walks away.
It is a very humbling perspective.
If life is just a transient walk that eventually fades, it fundamentally changes how we view the steps we're taking right now. It makes the ethics of our daily walk incredibly urgent. So what does this all mean for how we act? How does walking equal living in the biblical mindset?
The lexicons point out that the qual and piel forms of the verb are used metaphorically to describe a person's entire mode of existence.
Let's define those terms for a second. Qual and piel.
In Hebrew, the qual is the simple, basic action, while the piel is an intensive form of the verb. Both are used extensively to describe moral conduct. To the ancient Israelite mind, your life is a path, and every decision is a step on that path. So your behavior is your walk.
That makes a lot of sense.
The text contrasts different types of walking. For instance, Isaiah 33.15 describes the one who walks in righteousness and speaks uprightly. This is a person whose entire lifestyle is characterized by ethical integrity.
And the contrast to that.
Proverbs 6.12 describes a worthless person, a wicked man, who walks in perversity of mouth. His steps are characterized by deceit and crooked speech. What is particularly noteworthy from the sources is the concept regarding self-sufficient human action.
Self-sufficient human action. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. Living without God, living in rebellion, is consistently described in terms of walking according to one's own dictates. Jeremiah 23.1 form speaks of walking in deceit. Psalm 1.1 pronounces a blessing on the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked.
And the prophets talk a lot about the heart, too.
Yes. Repeatedly in Jeremiah, the Lord condemns the people for walking after the stubbornness of their own heart.
Let's look at this through the lens of Reformed thinking, because that phrase, walking after one's own heart, is the biblical definition of total depravity.
It absolutely is.
We know total depravity does not mean every human is as evil as they could possibly be. It means that sin has affected every part of our nature, including our will and our desires. So if we are left to our own devices, if we just walk after our own heart, we will naturally walk away from God.
That is the natural human trajectory.
We are incapable of walking rightly on our own. Our natural inclination is not toward the light. As Ecclesiastes 2.14 points out, the fool walks in darkness. If the heart is deceitful above all things, as Jeremiah tells us, then letting your heart be your compass is the most dangerous thing you can do. Your internal compass is broken. You need an external truth to guide your steps.
In the Reformed tradition, following the Westminster Confession's chapter on free will, we recognize that the human will is bound by sin until liberated by grace. Therefore, walking in the statutes of God is not something a person can initiate out of their own fallen nature.
We just don't have the capacity on our own.
The natural man will always choose to walk in the counsel of the wicked, because that is what appeals to the fallen heart. This ethical use of halak forces the reader to evaluate their default trajectory. Are your steps guided by the revealed word of God, or are you just meandering down the path of your own inclinations?
There is no middle option.
The biblical text makes it clear that there is no neutral ground. You're either walking in the light or walking in the darkness.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It is not just about walking in abstract concepts like light or darkness. It is about who you are walking behind.
This is a massive distinction in the text.
Let's talk about the specific phrase, halakah. This translates to walk after or follow. There is a massive difference in how this phrase is used when talking about false gods versus how it is used when talking about the true God.
The context changes entirely.
We all know what it is like to blindly follow a GPS right into a traffic jam or a dead end, trusting the voice on the phone more than our own eyes. The ancient world had its own version of blindly following, and it involved idols. How does halakah function in the ancient Near East context?
The source text points out that the phrase walking after is frequently used in the context of idolatry. You see it constantly in Deuteronomy, Judges, and the prophets. The people are condemned for walking after other gods or walking after the bells.
So it's a very specific idiom for idolatry.
Yes, and the historical context provided in the source is fascinating. Walking after likely originates from pagan cultic processions. In the ancient Near East, idol worship was highly visual and highly physical.
Give us a picture of what that looked like.
A wooden or stone idol would be hoisted up, perhaps on a cart or carried by priests, and paraded through the city streets or out into the agricultural fields. The worshippers would literally, physically walk behind the idol in a grand procession.
So they were physically walking after it.
Exactly. So when the biblical text says Israel walked after Baal, it is not just a metaphor for apostasy. It has roots in the literal physical practice of blindly following a carved piece of wood in a pagan parade.
You were just falling in line behind a lifeless object staring at the back of a cart.
Staring at the back of a cart is a great way to put it.
But the Reformed distinction here is amazing. Israel largely avoided saying they walked after Yahweh. There are a few rare exceptions, but generally, that is not the terminology used for faithful Israelites.
No, the prepositions change completely.
Instead, the pious Israelite walks with God, or walks before God. We see this right at the beginning of the Bible. In Genesis 5, the text says Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more.
And Noah as well.
Right. In Genesis 6, Noah is described as a just man who walked with God. And in Genesis 17.1, God appears to Abraham and commands him, "Walk before me and be blameless." Think about what that means, living face to face with the covenant-making God.
It is a completely different relationship.
Walking with someone implies relationship, conversation, intimacy. Walking before someone implies living under their sovereign days with accountability and transparency. It is a dynamic, personal relationship rather than blindly following the back of an idol in a mindless pagan parade.
The theological implications of those prepositions with and before versus after are staggering. Walking with God, as Enoch and Noah did, requires agreement. As the prophet Amos asks, can two walk together unless they are agreed?
It requires a shared direction.
It speaks to a covenantal alignment of the will. Walking before God, as commanded to Abraham, carries the sense of living your entire life coram Deo in the presence of God. It is living with the constant awareness that the sovereign Lord is watching your steps.
Which completely redefines religion for the ancient mind.
It is not about ritualistic processions. It is about an ever-present relational accountability. The idolater walks behind a mute statue, seeing only its back, following a predetermined route of superstition. The covenant believer walks beside a living God, hearing his voice, or walks before him, guided by his eye.
If we are walking before God, it means he is actively present in our reality. God is not just sitting stationary in heaven watching us walk around down here. The anthropomorphic uses of halak are applied directly to God. God is not static, he moves.
He is highly active in the text.
We get this beautiful, intimate, and, well, heartbreaking picture right after the fall in Genesis 3:8. Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit, and they hear the sound of the Lord God walking back and forth in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day. God is actively present in the space of his creatures. The Hebrew uses the Hithpael form there, doesn't it? What does that specific form communicate about God's movement?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Hithpael form implies a reflexive or iterative action. It translates to walking to and fro, or strolling. It shows a God who is actively occupying the space of the garden, seeking out his creatures.
Seeking them out even in their sin.
Exactly. But there is another grammatical form of the verb, which the lexicon calls the Hiphil form. The Hiphil is the causative form of a verb. So if the qual means to walk, the Hiphil means to cause to walk or to lead.
To cause to walk.
Yes. And the source material points out that in 24 of the 45 instances of this Hiphil form in the Hebrew Bible, God is the subject. God is the one causing the walking.
That is a staggering statistic.
For example, in Exodus 14.21, during the crossing of the Red Sea, the text says God caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind. He caused the waters to walk away. In Deuteronomy 8.2, Moses tells the people to remember how the Lord their God led them, caused them to walk all the way in the wilderness these 40 years.
And it is not always comfortable leading either. 2 Kings 24.15 describes the Babylonian exile. It says that the king of Babylon carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, but behind that historical event is the theological reality that God is the one who leads or causes his people to walk into exile for discipline.
It is a difficult truth, but a biblical one.
This brings up the massive tension of God's providence. We make our choices, we walk in our ways, but God is the one directing the final outcome.
This forces us to synthesize these grammatical points around the doctrines of God's providence and sovereignty. The biblical witness, using this specific causative form of halak, insists that God is the primary mover in history.
Following the Westminster Confession, we know God ordains whatever comes to pass.
Right. Even when Israel fails to walk in his statutes, when they choose to walk after their own hearts, God retains total sovereignty. He is the one who causes them to walk into the wilderness to humble them. He's the one who causes them to walk into exile to discipline them.
He is always in control.
And beautifully, as Isaiah 42.1 says, he is the one who guides the blind on paths they do not know. The reformed understanding of providence shines through the hurtful form of halak. We are not autonomous wanderers. Our steps are directed, caused, and led by a sovereign God who is working all things according to the counsel of his will.
That is a massive thought to wrap our minds around. Let's recap the huge linguistic scope we've covered today. A single root word, halak, defines the creeping of a snake in the dust, the floating of an ark on floodwaters, the fading of the morning dew, our daily moral actions, our rebellion against heaven, and God's sovereign leading of history.
It is incredible to see it all laid out like that.
All of that is packed into 3 little Hebrew consonants. So I want to ask you, the listener, to evaluate your own steps today. Who or what are you walking with? Are you walking in your own counsel, following the broken compass of your own heart? Are you walking behind the modern equivalents of mute idols? Or are you walking before the face of a sovereign covenant-making God?
To leave you with one final striking fact from the source material we have not yet discussed, there is a noun derived directly from this verb, and that noun is halakha.
Halakh.
Yes. In early Judaism, the entire doctrine of proper conduct, the whole massive body of Jewish rabbinical law that dictates how a person should live every aspect of their life, is named halakha.
So the law itself is named after walking.
It literally means the way of walking. It is derived directly from this simple verb to walk. What this shows us is that from the very beginning, faith was never meant to be a static set of beliefs. It is a constant forward motion. It is a life lived in action step by step under the authority of God.
Faith is a forward motion. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the language of the Scriptures. We hope this analysis has challenged your thinking and given you a fresh perspective on what it means to walk with the Lord. Keep seeking, keep studying, and keep walking.